All right, item 7, standing informational and ad hoc reports and items. Items A, demographic study presentation, population and survey analysis. Analyst, apologize.
Okay. Good evening, President Hogemeyer, Board of Trustees, Mr. Crow. My name is Chris Poole, and I'm with Population and Survey Analysts. And I have Justin Silhavi and Tiffany Thomas-Rogers here from our office, and we are here to present a new update. We've done several projects for you guys, but it's been a couple of years, and you got a lot going on, a lot of growth going on, and so we're going to present our findings here. You have a copy of the report itself somewhere buried. I know you guys have lots of packages and Girl Scout cookies and things, but you do have a copy of the report there. Let's see if we can get this to work. Okay, so just a little bit of an overview here about what exactly it is that we do, in case you're not familiar with it or it's been a little while since we've talked to you guys. We have to go in, anytime we do a study, we have to collect background data. And so we have to start, even with census data, we have to look around you what's going on. What's going on, why would someone want to live in Willis ISD when they could live across the line in another school district? Of course, we have to study housing and economic data. And that's very important because most of your new students you're going to get is from new housing. We're not going to get the new housing unless we have a solid economic base. So that's, of course, a giant part of the project that we have to do. We study past and current student enrollment. We look at trends, but we also, most of your kiddos that are going to be here next year are here today. And so we geocode all of those students. They pop up like a little dot on the map, and you'll see that map here in a minute. And then we analyze that data in several different ways that is very useful to us. We generate projections that are district-wide. We do a low, moderate, and high scenario of growth. We normally use our moderate scenario of growth for all of our planning and everything, but we do want to factor in what might happen if we have a charter school open or if interest rates drop. We might end up on the low end or we might end up on the high end. And then finally, we take that information, all of everything that we've studied, and we dump it into little tiny sections. We call them planning units here. They're like little puzzle pieces, and then we can look at what that means for new facilities, because that's really why we're here. We're trying to be sure that we have all of the facilities and the teachers and staff and everything in place for the students. Can somebody click to the next slide? There we go. Okay. So demographic study components, the very first thing we'll do, the first little section here is talk just a little bit about demographic trends. So we'll go to the next slide. This first slide is going to show us a map of the PASA data for the Houston area.
Next slide.
Next slide. Can we go to the next slide? There we go. Okay. So this is a 5-year look at the change in enrollment in the area. Like I say, we have to start with what's going on in the region because that impacts you guys. This is PASA data changed from the fall of 2017 to the fall of 22. And of course, now we've gotten the fall of 23 and all that PASA data has been turned in. But we can't access it for the entire state until probably April or so. So this is sort of 1 year removed. But you can see, thank you, that you guys are about 14th in the region for the amount of growth between 17 and 22, and that does include the COVID year. And you guys were one of the handful of school districts that still gained, I think you gained like 17 kids in that fall of 20 COVID year, but so many districts in the entire state lost student population that year. What's interesting to me about this, though, is always just the concentric rings of color. You can see all of that red and maroon sorts of colors that we see. We're from College Station, so it's definitely Aggie maroon there. On the outsides of the Houston area, you can see the loss in the central area as people are moving outward to the suburbs. And there you guys are at the top, just poised to have some of those additional students coming in. This is what the enrollment looks like over the last 10 years. The district has averaged around 200 students per year in gain. It was, I don't remember off the top of my head, 200, yeah, just right at 200. It's been 2,193 since the fall of 2013. And so you can see, if you follow that trend just a little bit, I think you're going to see a little bit of an upward trend, upward ticking there right at the end. One thing that's real important and hard for us to get at, hard for anybody to get at, is your kindergarten enrollment. We can't knock on doors and ask how many 3-year-olds are in the house. They're not going to tell us. They're probably going to call the cops. So one thing that we can do is we can get birth data by zip code of the birth mother from the Texas Vital Statistics. Now that's by zip code. That doesn't exactly line up with Willis ISD, but we take it and manipulate it the best we can using some population points and things. We take the births and we move them forward about 5 years and compare them to your kindergarten enrollment. And so you can see how they've tracked along. You know, some ups and downs, and COVID is in there, and so, but generally they've tracked fairly closely together. And so you can see over the next 4 or 5 years, we see an upward trend as we would expect to see in a rapidly growing district like this district is. So we'll move on and talk a little bit about the students that I mentioned earlier, past and current students. I said that we geocode the students, and so at this point we've geocoded probably 6 or 7 data sets, or maybe 8 or 10 at this point, data sets for the district. And I don't always show this map. This is what the students look like, and then we take them and analyze them from there. But I think you could actually see a lot here. You can see in the maroon dots is the 2020, and then the green is 23-24. So where you can see the green is where you've had that new growth. That's new kiddos that have moved in the last 3 years. And so it's we have someone that does hundreds of thousands of these geocodes every year, and she's very, very good at it, really trying to track down every child possible using a half a dozen different data sources. So we feel like the data there is very good. And we take it, and one of the things that we do with that is we measure the ratio of students per home. And so you might think that there are 2 kids in every house. And there may be, but they're not all enrolled in Willis ISD at one point in time. I've got 2 kids. One's a junior at A&M, one's a senior in high school. And so I'm about to count a 0, even though I've got 2 kids. And so in reality, the ratio of students per home is a 0.35 here, and that's actually quite low for a lot of our suburban districts. This does include some RV parks. I think you guys are impacted probably by the lake homes that are around. But that 0.35 isn't important. It's a single number, and we almost never use that number. That is your average today. If you know absolutely nothing else, you may say that 0.35 students may be in any one given home. But it varies widely. You've got a lot of subdivisions that actually have 0 students in them, and you have some like Lake Conroe Bay and Oakwoods that are around a 1.2 students per home. And so what we have to do when we're doing our projections is we have to project not only the numbers of homes we're expecting and where and when, but we have to also project the ratio of students that we would expect in each one of those. We're not just going to apply 2, we're not going to apply 0.35, we're going to try to look and see these homes look like these other homes that we have data for. And so that's how we apply a ratio to try to get at the accurate number of actual students that you're going to have. Multifamily, I know, is a lot less of a big deal for you guys. Its average is a 0.27. That ranges anywhere from about 0.04 to 0.40 students per home. And then one final piece here before I hand it over to Justin to talk a little bit about housing. Charter schools and private schools and homeschool, all of those things are impacting every single district in, I guess, in the country, certainly every single district in the state. And I remember when charter schools first became a thing, we thought, yeah, this is going to be an annoyance for our data, and now we have someone that I swear we could hire 3 people to do nothing but study charter schools. We can get some data for charter schools from TEA, but it is quite masked. A lot of the numbers are small, and so they hide a lot of the numbers from us. And so we spend an awful lot of time trying to unmask that and work backwards and try to estimate how many students are in each one of those and how many come from Willis ISD. We estimate, and then we contact a lot of the charter schools, and we contact as many private schools as we can that we think may have Willis ISD students. For charters, we think there's only about 167 students that you're losing right now to charters. You can see on here in the red dots are private schools and the blue dots are charters. And so if a new charter were to drop into the middle of Willis ISD, you would lose students to it, certainly. Most of the time we see students that are in charters from either right around where that charter is, they don't provide transportation. Or it's a lot of times along a transportation route where mom or dad may go to school and take them, and you think, why is this child enrolled in a charter school 25 miles away? It's because it's on the way to work for mom and dad. So at this point, we've done as much studying as we can. We don't see it being an impact much for you guys right now. It always could be in the future. We do have one high school that is adding some space in the Conroe ISD area. We wouldn't expect it to pull more than about 15 kids from you all right now. And with that, I'll hand it to Justin.
Good evening. It's nice seeing you guys again. Are there any new board members in the last 2 years?
Yes.
1 or 2? Okay. I'm just going to real quickly go over kind of our methodology for our housing assessment. So we don't just look at what's happening today. You know, we know what's happening in Woodland Hills. We know what's happening in any active neighborhood, but we want to look forward. So when we do a housing assessment, we're looking at what's active on the ground today. We actually have an employee who goes and drives. He tries to figure out how many slabs are being poured today. We talk with developers to understand what's coming. We talk with the city, we talk with other officials and developers to know what's in the pipeline. We also look at who owns land, how many investors are here. We want to see what could be built in the next decade, because we do project out to a decade. So we know that what you have on the ground today will build out. So what's next? So as we move forward into the future, we also look at the economy. And so we know right now the mortgage rates have increased quite dramatically over the last year or so. They've been leveling out around 7%. Some builders are able to now get, they're kind of working with homeowners, and we're seeing a lot of people being able to get a 6% mortgage or so. But for every 1% increase, that's about $200 added to your monthly cost. That table is down there. But one really good thing about this slide that I want to show you is that balanced market table. A couple of years ago, for every home sale, or all the homes on the market could be sold in about a month and a half in the Houston metro area. That's now over 3 months. So we've increased the time that all homes could be sold. A balanced market is considered 6 months. We haven't been there in decades. We've been underbuilt for a while. But we're getting closer to that 6 month mark. So homes are still selling. That's my point. I could have said that. A couple of highlights here in Willis that kind of set you apart. As Chris mentioned, the ratios of students per home is quite low. That could be attributed to Lake Conroe. You have a higher retiree population here. You even have one development, Chambers Creek, that is now solely devoted to seniors 55 plus, 3,000 homes. That broke ground a couple of years ago. You have these estate lot subdivisions coming on, Republic Grand Ranch, 5,000 acres, 2-acre lots. Those are also geared toward retirees for the most part. We have built-to-rent communities popping up in the southern part of the district. These are kind of a newer phenomenon. Built-to-rent is basically, they look like single-family homes, but they're all rentals. And so you're going to hear that term more and more pop up. You've got 2 now planned in this district. As I mentioned, your retirement hub. And also, we now are starting to see a lot more apartments. The League Line Corridor has 3 now under construction. So that will start appearing in the 45 corridor as we move forward. These are all things we have to consider. It's not just single-family homes. There are a lot of developments in this district. Chapter 3 in the report shows you all of them. There's an appendix that has a table showing you projections for every single development. We are only highlighting a few here. These are your top 5 single-family developments over the next 10 years. Woodland Hills, of course, by Howard Hughes, tops the list. It's still in its infancy. There's an entire southern section south of 830 that will actually probably get going in the next 2 to 4 years. Republic Grand Ranch, I mentioned, that's those 2-acre lots, way far in the northeast part of the district. Moran Ranch, that's now going right here in Willis off 45. Camillo, formerly Academy Development, is now building Ridgeland Hills in Willis as well, or right outside Willis. And then there is a large tract in Conroe in the far southwest part of the district that has a MUD now planned for a developer to come in and build housing. It's half in Conroe, half in Willis. There are a lot of other tracts available. They're all outlined in the report and on your maps. These developments have the most single-family housing. A lot of them I just talked about. But of your top 10 developments here on this map, 6 of them have no homes in them today. 3 of them just got going. So that's how new so many of these developments are. If we go to the next slide, I want to just show you in the far top left corner is a 1-year projection for housing, broken up by planning unit. It's a hotspot map. Each map shows you another 3 years of development. So you can see that bottom right map there, that's showing you the 10-year projections, the hotspot in 10 years for single-family development. Most of it's concentrated west of 45 or in the 45 corridor. But we're starting to see a lot more development also on the eastern side of the district. A lot of that's larger lots, won't be as dense. But in that southeast part of the district, off 1484, we're starting to see some developments pop up. So that's another area to watch. When we're talking about rental communities, I mentioned some new apartments coming in. In the next 10 years, 5,800 apartments are planned, or we think, we're projecting over 5,800. That's about 19% of your total housing projected. Build to rent consists of about 4.8% of the first 5 years of single family housing. So it's still pretty small, but it's substantial when you actually think about it. There were 0 build to rent communities just a few years ago. These are those rental communities. We have 1 currently leasing up off the league line, and then another 2 under construction. 1 just got going back at West Fork. Another 4 are coming soon in the next 5 years. So, and they're all concentrated in the southern part of the district and off 45. So, in the next 10 years, we're looking at 30,240 housing units projected. That's anything from an RV to an age-restricted home in Chambers Creek to an apartment off league line. So that's everything. So we're looking at about 69% of that total single-family housing, 19.3% multifamily. Age-restricted consists of 7% of that total. That could be an apartment or a single-family home, but we want to separate that out. We don't project students there. And manufactured housing could be anything from an RV to a tiny house, which you guys do have here, and also manufactured housing. So there's about 5% manufactured housing in this district. You guys have a lot of different types of housing here, very unique. But we're starting off in year 1, in the next 12 months, with a total of just under 2,000 housing units projected. Of that, about 1,200 or so single-family houses. You've been hovering around 1,000 single-family homes being constructed every year in this district, the last 2 or 3 years. In 2019, you actually had fewer than 400 constructed. That's how quickly construction has picked up. We'll see this pick up a bit and maybe level off is what we're thinking. It really depends on what happens to some bigger tracts of land that are currently undeveloped, but we'll kind of wait and see. The higher growth scenario would assume some of these larger tracts that currently have no plans on them may get going, may ramp up. But don't forget, we've already projected housing in other pieces of land that may currently be owned by developers, just nothing's going on yet. So when we move forward and factor all this into how it will actually create student enrollment, we have to look at birth rates in the kindergarten class as well. Chris mentioned we've seen an uptick in births. That's true. She's not lying. Over the last couple of years, we've seen about 100 more births in the district than just a few years ago. So very quickly, you're going to start seeing that kindergarten class tick upwards. And as new homes get occupied, it'll actually increase even further. We look at regeneration in some of the older neighborhoods. If that is occurring, we factored that in as well. As Chris mentioned, no charter schools are on the horizon that would really impact the district. And of course, new housing construction is your main driver of growth. So all that gets put into our models. And what you're looking at here is our moderate growth scenario as the dotted line, flanked by the low and the high growth scenario. So currently we're sitting at about 9,000 students in 2023, 2024. That could increase by upwards of 10,000 students by 2033. You are at the point where you're going to start seeing that increase. The last few years, you haven't seen major increases. The housing just got going. There's always a little bit of a lag from when new housing starts to when you start seeing students. A higher growth scenario could mean those ratios of students increase. They typically do. Some of your developments are a little more starter home communities. It may take a while for those to have a higher student density. We believe it will happen. A lower growth scenario could mean, well, the economy slows or something unforeseen we don't know about. Or you have charter schools, as Chris mentioned, move into the district, which would not surprise me. No one wants to hear it, but it could happen. It's happening in a lot of our suburban districts. So a lot of things to consider, but the trajectory is up from this point forward. Again, here I've just outlined a few scenarios, but the moderate growth is really what we want to focus on, and it does assume that there will be no new charter schools in the short term. It also assumes mortgage rates will remain about the same, hovering around 6 to 8% in the short term. It also assumes that your kindergarten class will increase to over 1,200 by 2033. There's a couple of, you can read in the report what the low and the high growth scenarios assume, but I've mentioned a lot of that already as I talked about those scenarios. So with that, I'll hand this back over to Chris, and she'll talk about how this will impact your campuses.
Okay. Got just a couple of slides left here so that we can talk a little bit about the schools themselves. But one thing I did want to emphasize is the difference between geocoded or resident students and enrolled students. And Mr. Crozier nodded his head there because he knows what I'm about to say. When we're looking at all of these students and where they're coming in, we're looking at where they live. And that doesn't necessarily, or where we think they're going to live. That doesn't necessarily mean that's always where they're going to go to school. You guys have quite a few students that are transferring, like, out of a couple hundred out of this school and a couple hundred into this school and that sort of thing at the elementary level. So we consider anybody that is not attending school in the zone that they are living in, that they reside in, as a transfer. So it can be a program, it can be a faculty member, taking their kid with them to school, that sort of thing. There can be lots of different reasons. But what the numbers that you're going to see here are mainly geocoded students, but we have to keep that transfer student number in mind. What we do is we have the data divided into planning unit for anybody that's not familiar with this. It's sort of our organizational tool, and it's referenced throughout the report. It's the way we organize all of the data. We can't organize it at the street level. We would all be crazy. And so we have these planning units that are just either subdivisions or they're parcels of land in subdivisions, and they include some apartment complexes and things. And for each one of those planning units, we have the number of students that we're projecting by year and by grade group. And so they're just puzzle pieces. They fit inside your current attendance zones. We can take your current attendance zones that way, break them apart, put them together in all these different ways. And so that's how we do long-range planning with the district. So the map here shows geocoded students, like I say, because you do not have, 878 students at Parmley, for example. You have 225 students that you're losing out of that, whereas you're adding 203 students into Canaan when we're looking at how many kiddos live outside the Canaan zone and how many actually then are transferring in. So the thing that is interesting on this map is less the number itself, because that's not going to tell you how we're actually enrolling students. But what is interesting to me is the magnitude of growth between 24 and 28, or from 24 and 33. And you can see in so many of these situations, if you remember actually Justin's hotspot map a little while back, by the end of the projection period, we're looking at hotspot everywhere. The whole district is one giant hotspot. And so that's how you can see that Parmley, for example, we're expecting by in the 10-year projection period could potentially double. So that means you could fill another school like Parmley in Parmley's attendance zone. And so that's something that's just what you look at here. I know you guys have another elementary school on the way, and so all of this will change. So we're just going to hit sort of the high points here. This is the same series of numbers. Looking at all of these over time, you're looking at basically everybody is at 1,000 students or so or more by that 2030 or 2031 spot, with all of the schools having between 700 and about 866 as a capacity figure. What I've highlighted in yellow, though, as I mentioned, transfers and that being a big deal, and you've got a lot of kiddos at the elementary level transferring. The yellow is what is highlighted there. It's highlighting the year in which that facility is projected to be over 120% of capacity, including transfers. And the reason I said 120% is that most districts that are growing have to use portable buildings or temporary buildings. Everybody would love not to use them, but if you're growing rapidly, you can't build a school when you have 4 extra kids walking the door. And so we use those temporary buildings. However, at some point in time, you have those temporary buildings, you still got to bring them inside, you got to feed them in a cafeteria, you got to send them to the library, and you begin to run out of common space. And so a lot of our districts use 120% or so. It's not a hard and fast number, but that's sort of where they're looking at. We got to have something else on the ground to adjust here. This does not include, of course, the new elementary school you're talking about. And so really, your long-range planning stuff at this point needs to sort of wait until that attendance zone is set for that new school. How many of the facilities do you have? How many of your current facilities are going to be relieved by that new school? We know it's going to hit, Lagway and Meadow, but are we going to tweak anything else along the way? That's what we'll have to wait and see. But what this does show you is basically a potential doubling of the elementary school population over time. And so therefore you would need to sort of double the facilities, would give you an idea of what we're talking about. And again, an awful lot has happened in the last couple of years, all of these sort of global things that we're living through. And so all of those similar sorts of things could happen over the next 10 years. We would expect the first few years to be much more reliable than the last few years. But since it takes a while to build these schools and get them on the ground and find the land and that sort of thing, we like to look at where we think we're headed over the next handful of years and then continue to come back and take a look at it year after year. Just here at the 6th through 8th grade level, you've got a lot fewer transfers, so it's a little easier to look at these numbers here. We're looking at, Lucas gaining about 1,000 students or so, and maybe 1,500 at Brabham over the 10-year time period. Same sort of thing here, 120% of capacity there is highlighted with those little yellow circles. Again, this doesn't count for the new school. If you have the third school come on and it's got about 1,200 students of capacity, then you're looking about 3,400 kiddos, 3,500 students of capacity, and you reach that point somewhere in the 2029 or 2030 standpoint where you would then need another middle school on the line. And then at the high school level, unfortunately, of course, we have to be dealing with that at some point. We've highlighted 120% there, including the CTE capacity. That's in the fall of 28. So on one hand, that doesn't mean that you don't have to make a big bunch of decisions about the high school today, but it takes 2 years to build them, and you got to get the land, and you got to pass the bond, and you got to do the site work and the planning and all that sort of thing. So we know that those high schools in particular take an awful lot of time to get on the ground. So with that, we will open it up to questions. Lots of work.
I've worked with PASA for a number of years, and wanted to compliment them to the best in the state at doing this.
Thank you.
Worked with them in Katy, and they were in their rapid growth. When they give us these numbers, yeah, it could change. It's going to be in that range right there. And so it's what you've got to plan for. Notice I said you've got to plan for.
He keeps saying that, and he keeps calling me later and saying, well, now I'm in Willis, or now I'm after counties.
Any questions for her? Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it, thank you.
And I'll be calling questions.
Whatever y'all need.
Item B.